You're listening to the Tamar Yona Show here at Israel News Talk Radio. So today's show is going to be an interesting veering off course for me as I get into a situation where we are going to be discussing war, but not necessarily a war about Israel or that Israel was involved in, although it will lead that way later on. I'm holding in my hand a book called A Destiny of Memories, called Fire and Rain by David Ramati. He is a very interesting man who lives in Israel today, but he served in the United States Army where he served in Vietnam. And this book that I'm holding in my hands talks about his experiences fighting a war that was impossible to win under those circumstances that he was in. And when they came back, how they coped with PTSD when they didn't even have those terms in those days. Now, why am I doing this on Vietnam? Because it directly will point to what Israeli IDF soldiers go through when we are fighting wars that we are never allowed to win. How many times have we gone into South Lebanon, into Gaza to fight the terrorists there? And before we can win, we have international pressure saying, no, 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 you have to have a ceasefire. And we do. But in the meantime, a soldier who served there saw his friends being blown up. And they come back. And what do they have? Almost nothing. It's very, very difficult for our soldiers who are serving, and they see the death and the horror that these young boys coming out of high school have to go to because people are drafted here in Israel. And then nothing was accomplished during this war, and their friends were blown up in front of their eyes. So we're going to be talking about this, and you can call in. We are live if you're listening between 8 to 9 p.m. Holy Time right here in the land of Israel on Tuesday, or if it's between 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Time in the Western Hemisphere. It means that we are live. You can call us. Our numbers are on our homepage at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com at the top of the page, and you can call in with your comments or your questions. This is going to be a heavy show, but a real eye-opening one as well. So don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Welcome to my country, where beauty, fresh air, expanses of barren land, and danger await you in the wild, wild West Bank. Wait! We're talking about Judea and Samaria, the biblical homeland of the Jewish people. Hi, I'm David Ha'ivri, a Hebrew in the heartland, and I'll be broadcasting to you every Wednesday from the mountains of Israel. Want to know what it's like to live in Israel's wild west? Tune into my show, and I will show you how we live and what it's like to be a Hebrew in the heartland.
And we are back here at the Tamar Yona Show on Israel News Talk Radio. So as promised, I'm going to be giving you a very interesting show today that's going to take us all the way back to the 1960s, because the war that was being fought by U.S. soldiers in Vietnam is not too different in certain ways with the wars that our IDF soldiers are fighting today, meaning that they come back from a war that perhaps wasn't always supported by the population here, and I'm talking about the Lebanese war, the Lebanon war. And second of all, coming back and not being able to finish a war, to see your friends die, sometimes blown up in front of you, and then to come back without having won the war, knowing you'll have to go back again, knowing that, God forbid, perhaps they gave up their lives for nothing. Could someone think like that? But we all say, of course not, because we had to do this. We were under attack, the whole population. Well, I have on the show right now David Ramati. He is the author of the book called A Destiny of Memories, Fire and Rain. It's book one. And I read this book, and I must say he is a good writer. And I think that you're going to want to read this book as well. It's quite different than anything you've read before. Now, let me tell you a bit about David Ramati. He served in the U.S. Marine Corps for 2 combat tours in Vietnam, where he received the Presidential Unit Citation. After an honorable discharge, he returned to complete his studies at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. And after a long period of soul-searching, Ramati converted to Orthodox Judaism and immigrated to Israel. David Ramati served for another 25 years in the Israel Defense Force, rising to the rank of Captain of Infantry. And among his last assignments for the IDF, he was gathering intelligence information for a special unit of military intelligence. He became proficient in Hebrew and conversant in Arabic. David today is married and has a son, also an American citizen, who carries on the proud tradition of serving in the Israel Defense Forces. And also, he has 5 beautiful daughters and 27 grandchildren, with 2 more on the way, and 2 great-grandchildren. What a life he's lived. Both David and his wife, Marta, were only children. And look how many grandchildren they have today, 27. After Vietnam, David searched for his roots, and he converted to Judaism under a heter from Rabbi Moshe Feinstein. His maternal grandfather was Jewish, but his maternal grandmother was not. David currently lives in the combat zone called Kiryat Arba, Hebron, and saw his time in the IDF as a continuation of his time in Vietnam and in the fight for freedom as a proxy war against the enemies of America and the free world. Now, his current book, which I'm holding in my hands, A Destiny of Memoirs, Fire and Rain, is the first book of a trilogy which deals with veterans returning from war and is as relevant today as it was then. This series is autobiographical, and it's based on David's diaries that he made when he was in Vietnam, which chronicled his journey from his birth to Chicago Southside Memorial Hospital, where he received a brit in honor, or a circumcision, in honor of his grandfather, to his formative years in a small Wisconsin town. In Vietnam, Judaism, Israel, and finally coming home to his spiritual people. He has a second book coming out. I can't wait to read it. It's a completion of Destiny of Memoirs, Fire and Rain, and it can be previewed on his author's website at www.davidramati.com. We will link to that page. That book is called Destiny of Memories, Phoenix Rising. Whew, what an introduction. Welcome to the show, David Ramati.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your show, Tamara. It's a great pleasure to be here. I've always been a big fan of yours.
Do I salute you?
I don't think so. I'm not in uniform.
Okay, you're not in uniform. All right. Well, I salute you in any case because, wow, you have probably killed a lot of people yourself.
Unfortunately, that's why I got the Presidential Unit Citation, and it's not, really something I'm proud of. It's something that had to be done, particularly in Vietnam, and I thankfully didn't have the same sort of a situation in the IDF, where the IDF is the most humanitarian army in the world.
So I'm just going to throw this out of left field. I usually wait a little bit longer in an interview to ask a question like this, but when you go to sleep at night, knowing how many people that you've killed, and I'm not saying that you wanted to do this, you were also about 17, 18 years old when you went off to war in the 1960s, but do you have nightmares at night?
For many years, I relived a lot of this, and I think that probably coming to Israel, finding some real purpose in my life and serving in the IDF over the 25 years has pretty much chased away all my demons. I don't have that problem anymore, but in the beginning it was tough.
So you've really had some interesting life. You were born a Gentile. You had a Jewish grandfather on your father's side, grandmother, right? Grandmother on your father's side.
That would be my mother's father was Jewish, and
your mother's father was Jewish,
right?
Okay.
And my mother's mother was a Gentile.
But you weren't raised Jewish.
No, I was raised basically pretty much agnostic. That seems to be a sort of a compromise that a lot of mixed marriages, you could say. You just kind of pick and choose, try to find the best of either one, and try to see what you can find. Unfortunately, I really didn't have an awful lot of Jewish experience. However, as soon as I went in the Marine Corps, they noticed that I had been circumcised, and they says, "Oh," so they just stamped Jewish on my dog tags.
So they stamped Jewish on your dog tags because you had a circumcision, but you weren't Jewish.
No, not halakhically, definitely not. But at least I'd have been buried as a Jew.
Interesting. Well, thank God you weren't buried. So tell us about how you got drafted into the U.S. Marines.
I wasn't drafted. I went to the university in 1965. I didn't want to miss out on the war. I dropped out of the university. I volunteered for the Marine Corps and volunteered for Vietnam.
Did you know what you were doing?
Of course not. No 18-year-old ever knows what he's doing. But we were raised in an entirely different era. We were raised in the era of the Kennedy, don't ask what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. Walt Disney's movies that taught us as little children that you had to fight for what was right. And of course, John Wayne. And so it was more or less something that was expected. I had two uncles that were in the Marine Corps and the World War II. And, maybe one of the things was the Cuban Missile Crisis. I remember I was probably around about, I was basically probably a freshman or so in high school at the time. And they called out the National Guard, the local unit of the National Guard, and they sent them down to a staging area in Florida for an invasion of Cuba. And I was saying, gee, I wish I could go with them. So that was the type of group of people that were sent to Vietnam in 1966 and 1967, and I was pretty typical.
Were you scrawny at that age?
I was scrawny when I went into the Marine Corps. I gained weight when I went through boot camp, and I lost an awful lot of weight in Vietnam. I think I was around about 115 pounds by the time I finished.
And that was because why?
Primarily a touch of malaria and an awful lot of super hot weather in the summer, nasty cold rain in the winter, and a very poor diet.
And a very poor diet. That's because of the Army food.
Yeah, the Army. This was not like the food that was given to the World War II or the Korean War veterans. They thought it was a pretty good upgrade, but even so, you couldn't really gain any weight on the food. You were always on the go, always moving, always doing something. You never really had much time for anything except catching a couple hours of sleep whenever possible.
Right. So, in comparison with the wars in Israel, I remember the last war we had, which was with Gaza. And the people, this time the whole country was under fire. It wasn't like in Vietnam, which was fought so far away from the shores of the United States. But here everybody was buying things for the soldiers, food, and most of it was junk food because it was easily stored. Mm-hmm. And I remember asking one soldier who came back from Gaza, did it help you at all? He says, it really would have been better if they had sent us nuts and fruits, dried fruits that keep also, because they said that the junk food was after like the first day or something, it was really hard for them. Mm-hmm. But they also, my son served in combat as well, and they do not get fed well in the Army, unfortunately, when they're out in the field. It's pretty sad, and they've also lost a lot of weight. But the book that you wrote here, called The Destiny of Memories, Fire and Rain, it was touching in a sense because this is an autobiography that you wrote, but you write it as if it's a novel. That's why I was a little bit unsure as I was reading things. Did this really happen to this? Because it is so fascinating, and you're reminding everybody that when you came back to the United States, instead of being appreciated for going out and defending America's interest, you were spat upon, you were hated. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, that's exactly what happened. We left thinking we were heroes and that we were serving our country, because at the particular time that we left, the anti-war movement hadn't really gained that much momentum. But after 13, 18 months, whatever, when my group of people came back, all of a sudden we were confronted with this rabid hatred of us, not so much of the government, because they couldn't touch the government, but the returning soldiers, Marines, and sailors were at fair game. I haven't seen anything or heard of anything like this since the election, where people that had supported Trump, for instance,
you know what, David, hold on 1 second. I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're going to a break. When we get back, you'll answer that question. Also, I want to remind everyone you can call in if you're listening live on Tuesday. So we'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. We're going to get into Israeli wars as well.
Hey, it's Ari Fulda at Israel News Talk Radio. If you, like me, are sick and tired, if you've had enough of listening to all the anti-Israel lies and propaganda that's being spread online and offline, in the press, in the newspapers, on TV channels, in the newsrooms across the world, tune into my weekly show, Bulletproof, on Thursdays at 5 p.m. as we discover, expose, and completely destroy all anti-Israel lies and propaganda. And we're going to do it with just the truth. As an active IDF reserve soldier and elite paratroopers unit, I will try to give you an inside look to the opinions of the men and women of the IDF on the situation. Bulletproof will give you the tools. More importantly, will give you the weapons to take down all anti-Israel activists, no matter where you meet them. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. Israel time to Bulletproof on IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com.
So we're asking the question tonight, what is it like to be a soldier fighting for your country, seeing your friends blown up before your eyes, and coming back from a war that you did not win? Was it all in vain? How do you cope with that? How do you take care of the PTSD, the trauma that you went through, and that your countrymen may or may not support? We're speaking with author David Ramati. He's the author of the book, A Destiny of Memories, Fire and Rain. It's all about his service when he was in the U.S. Marine Corps. And he was answering a question in the last break about what it was like to come home to the shores of the United States of America. And instead of being greeted as a hero and appreciated, actually he was spat upon. He was he heard derogatory statements, people snickering, people even telling him to his face, how could he do such a thing? Did he enjoy killing little babies? You'll find out all about it in this book, and I do recommend this book. It's a different type of book. You've never read a book like this before, and it's very, very interesting and can help you understand what it's like for IDF soldiers coming back from a war that we are never allowed to win against the terrorists, because we have Condoleezza Rice's and we have Hillary Clinton's and we have John Kerry's running over here to make a ceasefire and let the enemy stay alive. So what is all of this like? We're speaking again with David Ramati. And David, why don't you continue off what it was like for you to come back to America and having people spitting at you, people angry and not appreciating what you went through?
Well, I think that perhaps in America right now, the Trump supporters are getting a feel of what it was like for us. This divisive hatred, absolute hatred of the rank and file. If you walked into a tavern in certain areas and they found out that you were a Vietnam veteran, of course, they'd start up with you. People, I remember sitting in the student union when I came back to just go back and look at the school. And people absolutely stopped talking, except to basically raise their fist and turn the fist around and flipping me the middle finger. The girl I was sitting with, she simply asked me, what is it like to kill babies? And that sort of thing was hard.
So did you ever lose your temper? I mean, you just got back from killing a lot of people, and you've seen violence, being used to it. Did you ever want to fight back when you were trying to defend your honor?
No, I think my honor was less important than my service to my people. And even though they treated us pretty shabbily, I couldn't raise my hand against the people that I was sworn to defend and protect.
So when did you decide that, because this is already not in your book, I'm going to jump past your book. And by the way, again, I'm not getting paid for this at all, but I'm holding this book in my hand, and I would like to suggest if you're looking for something different to read, something that's a bit powerful and going to open up some regions of your mind that you never went to before, you may want to pick up this book, A Destiny of Memoirs, Fire and Rain, and we'll give out the website on our webpage as well. But David, when did you decide all of a sudden you were going to give up being, let me just put it in these terms, a Gentile living in the United States after the war, and you're going to move now to Israel, to another war-torn country?
Well, let's start out with the reason why. After I had I had a 6-year military service in the Marine Corps. I served 3 years on active duty, and I was a 3-year reservist. I went back to the University of Wisconsin under the GI Bill. And I grew my hair long, and I tried, not to mention wherever I'd been, because it was not a very popular thing. And I began to try to find some spiritual reasons. I started looking at the roots of my grandfather and the roots of my grandmother and what I saw around me, the 60s generation, the hippies, the whole spiel. And then, I began to realize that there really wasn't anything for me at that time in America except conflict. So I started thinking what the best thing would be to do. I was very fortunate. I met a woman who put up with me, my wife. We went to Door County, where we actually had a little small farm, about 80 acres. And we decided that, okay, let's find out more about Judaism. So I went to Green Bay, started learning with the rabbi in Green Bay, and it just seemed to fill my heart. And
so you just thought one day, I'm going to start to learn about Judaism? Yep. Where did that come from?
Somewhere inside, an internalization. I just don't know exactly how I could really explain that to somebody that has been in a desert for a long time and suddenly has been given a drink of water. You are not going to leave the well from which you received that water. It was just such an overpowering experience. When I started learning Judaism and Hebrew with the Rabbi Itzhak Landeveld, who was a survivor of the Holocaust. And essentially, I said, if I am going to be a Jew, and there's what's called the land of Israel, for the first time in 2,000 years, there's no way I will not be a part of that great, wonderful experience. And so I contacted the Saknut, the how do you say Saknut?
Jewish agency.
The Jewish agency. And they said, sure, bring your family. I had 2 children by that time.
What year was this?
This would be 1974 when I contacted them, right after the Yom Kippur War. And the reason why was I said, we almost lost the country in 73, and I'm not going to take a chance. I have to go over there.
How old were you then?
About 24, something like that.
Still very young. Uh-huh.
Mm-hmm. So
let me just ask you first. I'm sorry, but this is an important question for me. In 1967, when we liberated Jerusalem and we had the 6-day war, and this was something that the world was talking about, how Israel won a war in 6 days. Were you still in Vietnam in 1967? Where were you?
Oh, this is an interesting story. I had, because of being whatever I was in Vietnam, I was given a special 7-day furlough to go to Bangkok. When in Bangkok, I noticed that there were Israeli paratroopers that spoke excellent English, and so we started hanging out together, and all of a sudden the 6-day war started. And they were all lined up, I don't know how long. In those days, there was no telephones like we have today. You had to go to the post office, you had to wait for your time, you had to wait in line to make a overseas call from Bangkok to Israel, from Bangkok to America. And so one of them actually gave me his place, because I hadn't spoken with my mother in almost a year. So I called up and I had about a 10-minute conversation with my mother, which was the last one I ever had. And they said, look, why don't you come visit us in Jerusalem? This is in 1967. I said, that would be great. And so essentially, I extended my tour of duty in Vietnam primarily. There was a period of time where if you extended your tour of duty for another 6 months, you could go anywhere in the world at the U.S. government expense. And I said, I want to go to Jerusalem. It didn't work out, of course, because my mother was killed, and so I had to go back for emergency leave. But that all stuck with me. The Israelis and the way they accepted me.
You talk about your mother being killed in the book. I'm not going to say how. You're going to have to get the book in order to find out about that. And that's a big part of the book, by the way, as well. So you were very, very inspired by the 1967 war, I hear. And so now you said you got married, you and your wife converted to Judaism, and you made Aliyah. You came to live in Israel. Did you go straight to Kiryat Arba, Hebron, which you call a battle zone?
Oh no, we got off the flight in Ben Gurion the way it was then, and they told us first of all to wait to become the last people that were leaving, and we were 4 people, my 2 young daughters, babies, and my wife. They took us into this room with the lights and everything, and I thought, what is this, Exodus or something? And they interrogated us and decided that we were sane enough to stay in the country, and they sent us out to Oshiot. And Oshiot,
to where?
Oshiot and Rehovot.
Okay.
And we were met there by 2 basic shlichim. One was Itzhak Hildesheimer from Shalavim, and the other one was Yossi Anvari from Sede Eliyahu. Visited both places. In the end, decided that Sede Eliyahu was the place for us. We went there and we took the Ulpan. We learned, we worked on the kibbutz. We assimilated basically as Israelis. They took the children away from us, obviously, and so we had to learn Hebrew in order to speak with them at all. And then we went up to Keshet. If you remember, Keshet was in Quneitra and had gone back to Hoshnia, and we figured that we had to pay our dues and be on the front line. So we went up there.
Just so anybody doesn't know, Keshet is near Syria. It's up in the Golan there. Go ahead.
In those days, it was really up in the Golan. Now it's actually has its own wonderful people in Keshet. And there I met some fantastic people, including people from Kiryat Arba. Rabbi Waldman from Kiryat Arba was my neighbor. And when he went back to Kiryat Arba, we decided it was time for us to leave. And he said, simply come to Kiryat Arba, which we did. This is about 1975. And I've lived in Kiryat Arba ever since with the people here. And here I did basically most of my service. This is where I'd come back home after, I was in the IDF for 25 years. I went to Bahad Ahad. I finished Bahad Ahad. I was before that in the Magav and the border police. And I continued my 25 years basically here. And I hope I'll never leave.
Tell us in 30 seconds how you joined the IDF.
Well, first of all, they drafted me.
They did?
Yep. They said, we want you to go to the IDF. So I went and I did, basically everything all over again. I went through Turanut. I did the whole thing.
That's basic training. Okay, you know what? Hold it right there. I want you to give a good description about how this happened, because if you served in a different army, then they don't draft you really. I mean, you can get out of it, but we're going to talk more about that when we get back. We're speaking with David Ramati, and he's talking about Vietnam and Israeli wars. Don't go anywhere. You can call in if you have any comments or questions. We'll be right back. If you're hearing this message, everyone else can too. Advertise with Israel News Talk Radio and get your message out to people. We'll build a personalized package for you. Contact advertising at israelnewstalkradio.com.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio. Please consider supporting our advertisers who help keep us on the air so you can listen for free. Thank you.
I used to get up all the time at night to go to the bathroom and have to take numerous breaks at work as well. But not anymore. I found what some people claim is a miracle cure from Israel. It's made from the cactus flower called Opuntuma. It's an all-natural and herbal remedy that helps with urinary problems, and it's really helped me. No more embarrassing trips to the bathroom. Get it at Priso.com. That's Prisso.com.
From the U.S. Marine Corps to the IDF, our guest David Ramati, author of the book A Destiny of Memories, Fire and Rain. It's an autobiography, but it's written in the style of a novel, which makes it a very, very easy page turner. And we're talking about what it's like to serve your country, seeing your friends blown up in front of you and yet not winning the war, and coming back with PTSD, with trauma. How do you cope? So David, before we left the other segment, I was asking you how you got into the IDF. I mean, you already served, you almost lost your life I don't know how many times in Vietnam, and now what, you're going to go do it again in the IDF? Because again, the IDF, if you've served already in another military, even if you're called up for a draft, you can get out of it because you don't have to serve twice. So what happened with you?
Well, I never even considered for a moment that I'd want to get out of serving. I went to, at that time as I was living in Kashet, and I went to Tiberia, to the Lishkat Gius, to actually do everything that was necessary to do. Because I had Agent Orange, my profile was lowered to 82, and I was sent to Bakum and went through the entire thing. I did basic training. I started out as a private, and I was very, very happy because I was with so many wonderful people that were in the IDF. And I think I served about 8 months, something like that. And then I was immediately transferred to the reserves, where essentially it was Litani at that time. So I served in the Litani. That was a very, very brief time when we went into Lebanon in 1978. And I was amazed by the citizen soldiers that I served with. Absolutely, totally amazed. I think that this sort of changed again a little bit when I was in the Peace for the Galilee, the Shlomo Galil. And people started coming back, and we began to feel a little bit of the anger against the soldiers for serving in so-called unjust war. That was a difficult time, and it reminded me of coming back from Vietnam to a certain extent. The other thing that I didn't like about that war was when we pulled out and abandoned the South Lebanese army without even giving them a heads up that we were leaving. It reminded me an awful lot of what we did to the Vietnamese in the Vietnamese War.
Well, that was under Ehud Barak, right?
Right. That was some years later. But the thing of it was, we used to call this Vietnam Syndrome. Now they have all kinds of fancy names for it. But essentially what it means is that you have an unresolved situation, and you know you're going to go back again and again and again to an unresolved situation. And so I began to feel that a lot of our Israeli veterans, my son included, have had a certain trauma because there isn't a way to resolve this. It's constantly you're going up. My son, for instance, remembers very, very specifically in the Gaza war that he was together with a group of people that were looking for body parts of Israeli soldiers that were blown up.
All right, and so what is your take on this? I mean, when you go to war and you see your buddy, your best friends blown up in front of you, and you know that the war didn't solve anything, do you feel like they died for nothing? How did you come back feeling?
This is a very good question, a very difficult question to answer. In the terms of America, when we came back, the only thing we ever wanted from America was that America would love us as much as we loved America. But we have that in Israel. No matter what kind of different views we have on the war, there is never anything but love for the Israeli soldier that comes home. So I think that probably is one of the big differences between the Israeli soldier and the American soldiers, even today. Okay, and today they come back from Afghanistan, they come back from Iraq, and they say, thank you for your service. But what do they really know about what the service is? All they ever need to give us is just a little bit of love and a little boost. And I think things would have been a lot better for us then. And this is where the Jewish people, the Israeli Jew, will actually clasp the Hayal, the IDF soldier, into its breast and make him feel that you are finally home.
I, as a mother of soldiers and someone who served in the IDF myself, and my father served in the IDF, so over 3 generations right now, always hoping that our next generation, our children, won't have to serve in the Army, that they'll be peace finally. But when it's so frustrating for me as a mother and just as a regular citizen, knowing that when we go to these wars, that we're probably not going to be able to finish them because someone from the State Department, usually it's the Secretary of State, comes running over to Israel and saying, no, you cannot go on with the war anymore. You have to, this is not what they're saying, but this is basically what they're saying. You have to let the enemy live another day to fight another time because we're going to make a ceasefire now, which means that you cannot destroy the enemy. How do you feel about that?
Well, basically what we are experiencing today is sort of like welcome to Vietnam. It's been going on with all this idea of being politically correct and this idea of allowing your enemy to fight you again and not resolving a crisis and not resolving a war, ultimately has a terrible price on the soldiers that have to fight it. It's a terrible price. It's a terrible thing to have to live with afterwards. And it's a terrible thing to know that it's just a matter of time and you're going to have to go out there and fight another unresolved war without winning it. So I take my hat off to the IDF. Year after year, they continue to go to unresolved situations, do their very best, give the maximum, and come home. Or not, but loving their country.
And of course, the people love the IDF. This is something that so many of us do. Our husbands, our fathers, our daughters, our whole country is involved in the IDF, basically, and so we are the IDF. What is the message that you want people to go away with after reading your book and also from this interview?
There is light at the end of the tunnel. It can be very tough to come back, but with love and the love of your people, you can make the transition from basically Vietnam syndrome or Lebanon syndrome or Gaza syndrome to live a productive and a happy and a healthy life.
Do you have any, I know that you were wounded. You were telling me that you were wounded twice in Vietnam. Do you have any regrets about anything that you did in life? And do you, and what are your plans for the future?
Well, I'm also suffering from Agent Orange. I would never ask a dime from the United States government for that. I did my duty. And I'm proud of the fact that I did my duty, and it was for our people. Now it's for the Jewish people. Then it was for the American people, which also includes a lot of Jews. You know, most of the Jews that I first knew actually served in some of the units in Vietnam that I served with. Jews, for instance, have always given more than their quota to every war down through the history of the United States.
I think, if I remember correctly, you had a little bit of a joke about how somebody was, you were serving with a Jew, and he was saying how they celebrated Hanukkah. Was that from your book?
Oh, yeah, definitely. The first.
Okay, you know what? Don't tell the story. Don't tell the story. Make them read it. Make them read the book.
I sure
and I'm only saying that because I really do think it's worth the read. And you're a good writer, and I'm waiting for your second book. You better send it to me when you have your publisher send it to me. When it comes out, so I can take a look at it then and see if I can have you back on the show again to talk about that. So again, you have no regrets. You don't hold the American government for anything, even though you were wounded. How were you wounded? Very quickly.
Oh, I've just shrapnel. I mean, I'd call it Band-Aid wounds. I got a Purple Heart with a wounds cluster. And I also got Agent Orange, and which has been sort of hounding me over the last few years. But as I said. This is what you do. You pay a price to protect and to serve your people, whatever it is. I never asked for any compensation. I never will ask for any compensation.
When is your next book coming out?
I hope that in the summer or the fall of 2017, it will be published.
All right. So we're talking this year. Mm-hmm. And tell your publisher we need your books published closer together because it's not nice to keep us hanging.
Okay, you know what? I'll give you the draft so you don't have to understand. You don't have to wait for the book. All right.
All right. Again, everybody, we're talking with David Ramati. He is the author of the book. It's all about Vietnam, serving there. It's a autobiographical, his autobiography, but he writes it as if it's a novel. It's called The Destiny of Memories, Fire and Rain. And again, we will put a link on that on our website to there. And I want to say, David, thank you as an American. Thank you as an Israeli. Thank you as a Jew. It's a pleasure to get to know you. And I hope that your grandson right now who's serving in the IDF won't have to go through anything like you did, and that certainly his children won't have to be drafted anymore, that there'll be peace on earth and we won't need any more armies, and no one should have to go through what you went through, what your buddies went through, and what our good young men today, young men and women, are going through today as well. Thank you.
From your mouth to God's ear.
All right. Again, we're going to put a link on our website to his book, and I want to thank you for coming on. And please, God, if there is another war, let us win it finally, so we don't have to have any wars. They talk about the war to end all wars. It should be, please, God, the next war, if there is, because my sons are going to be fighting it, and other people's sons and daughters. We just want it to be over, to be the end. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the show. You've been listening to the Tamar Yonah Show here on Israel News Talk Radio. If you have any comments or questions, you can feel free to write me, TAMAR, at IsraelNewsTalkRadio.com. And you can also leave your comments on our webpage where this show is podcasted. Thanks for being with us.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
This is Shai Ben-Tekoa, and each week I'll be webcasting to you from Judea, origin of the word Jew, a people besieged and beleaguered in every generation. Nazi Germany is but a memory, but in its place the world invented the phantom Palestinians as this generation's internationally authorized Jew killers. Tune in for a different slant on life in Israel, Phantom Nation, every Monday.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.